welcome. Today we're going to make a patriotic round, and I'm actually going to be using an 18-inch round. I purchased it at Home Depot, but you can use whatever size you want. And we're actually going to burnish it today. We're going to burn them. And I used the benzomatic torch, or you can actually use, if you have a home kitchen torch, you can use that. You need some type of mask material. I'm using StarCraft mask. You can use Aura mask, whichever is your preference. You need transfer tape. I'm using a 12-inch transfer tape. This is from 143 vinyl. And then you need your colors. I'm using red, blue, and a little bit of brown on it. And then we're going to actually use baby wipes. I'm going to show you a baby wipe technique on this to make it look more of a stain. So those are the items that we're going to use. So the first thing we're going to do is I took my round outside and I'm using my torches. And you can see I have a smaller kitchen torch, and I'm going to turn it on, and you can use this. It totally works. It's just a smaller flame. It'll just take you a little bit longer, but it totally works. And so you can see, you just hold it over there and you give that whole burning look that you want. And then you can I actually just grabbed my bigger tank because I have a bigger one, and then I just used that, and I just really went to town and I did the my burning on it. I actually also did the sides as well, just to give it that finished touch and look. So once you're done with that, you can just burn it, and you can burn it to the extent that you feel that you like it. Some areas you might not do as much, some areas you might do more. And again, when you're doing this, make sure you're in a well ventilated area, because you can actually see there's flames, there's some smoke, and you can smell that burning sensation in there. Trust me, that comes from a word of advice. I did it in my house one time when I was doing it, and I always try and make sure I go outside and do it now. So when you go ahead and have the effect you like, then we're actually going to go ahead and do the stencil portion of it. I included two videos that will be in the blog as well. One is for doing a larger than matte cutting in your Silhouette software if you're a Silhouette user, and how to do a larger than matte cut in your Cricut design space. So I have a video for each one of how I did this so that you can see how I did it. Now I'm going to be transparent, and like I normally am when I'm doing my videos, because one, crafting happens. And the reason why I'm going to be transparent on this one is I did the videos to how to set everything up afterwards, so you can see I'm going to be making some mistakes, and so that's why I'm going to show it to you. The other thing is I should have marked my transfers and how they came out of my cutting machine, because after I cut off that extra piece, because I thought that was the extra piece I had to cut off, I realized I cut my design. All right, so again, crafting happens, but everything is salvageable. That's the important thing. I didn't have to go and recut anything or anything else like that. I just worked with it and ran with the scenario, and I just taped everything together. So again, life happens. I wanted to be transparent and tell everybody what happened and things like that. There might have been a word that I said, but I just want to share that it happens. And you can see here, this is the realization that I actually cut it wrong. So it happens, and I just went and got some tape and taped it together. Okay, so now I'm just coming in, and like I said, I'm fixing my mistake. I taped it together, a little frustration, threw it to the side, and I'm taking off my extra strips and just finishing the weeding. The other thing is, make sure when you're taking and weeding your stars, that the reason why I'm taking the back portion off is because I want the stars to be in there. The other thing is, when doing it, make sure that you have all your stars left on the sheet, because I didn't realize it until after I was doing my design that I missed one off of there. It wasn't a big deal. I just moved another star after I did the stencil in that area and just made it work. But again, just make sure you have it, because you can see there's where I missed the star, and just make it work from there. Now, so how I fixed my mistake, again, transparency, is I cut off the right side of it, the correct side of it. And I went and got some painter's tape, masking tape, regular tape. It doesn't make any difference. I went and got some tape, and I just laid the tape down and laid the two sides on top of it to put them together because they fit right together in the markings. So it wasn't a big deal. I just made it work. And then I took my transfer tape and laid it over the top of my design and went from there. So once we'll do that, we'll pull that extra piece off and we'll go from there. So lay your transfer tape on. And make sure you burnish it out as much as you can and try and get those air bubbles out because we want to make sure it's laying nice and flat. So I get everything done, cut off my extra pieces, and then I actually like to flip mine over, and I actually like to do it from the back side too because it helps get those air marks out. So I like to do mine from the back. It just really helps to move that around. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on my other two pieces. So I'm going to do the same thing for my star and for the smaller stripes as well. So once that's done, we'll be ready to go and place it on our board. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to take our transfer vinyl and we're going to take our round that we did and we're going to lay it our transfer vinyl down on the board. Now again, when you watch the video for doing the larger than a mat cut, I actually cut off those extra corners on the side for you and show you how to do that because they were kind of hard to work with. And so I went back and redid the video for you to talk about how to cut those corners off because you'll actually see me cutting it off in the video. Now, I showed two ways of doing it in the video. One is with registration marks and one is using for that top little stripe there with the alignment. I'm just making sure I have all my air bubbles out and getting everything done. I'm going to remove my transfer tape because it'll be a lot harder to do if I do the two layers. Now, one of the things when you're working with boards like this, if you can try and go away from the grain so that it doesn't pull any of your wood off, because sometimes when you're pulling with the grain, your transfer tape off, you can take some of the wood off. So you want to try and go away down away from the grain. So in this case I went top down, and then I just took my hand and I really smoothed things out to try and make sure I minimize my bleed down as much as possible. Okay, and then I just took my squeegee and I really laid everything out. And because I cut it, I'm also going to put a little bit of painter's tape over those cut marks just to make sure that I don't get any bleed through. Again, it was a mistake I did, just covering it up. And it's just to show you that crafting happens, you guys. Work with it, learn how to work around it. And this is where you see where I'm like, okay, I got a little frustrated in the corners, and it wasn't a big deal for me to cut them off at this point because I really just wanted the stripes on there. So I just cut those off and we went from there. So now let's lay the top portion off. And again, we're using that small stripe as our registration mark. So I'm pulling everything off. I'm sticking it back on my backing with just a little bit showing so I can slide it around and move it the way I want to. So once I have it on there, I hinged it, lay it down, and got everything nice and smooth the way I wanted it to. So I have everything as smooth as I can, and now I'm just going to peel away that transfer tape. And again, I'm trying as much as possible to go with the grain of the wood, but I also making sure that my transfer tape stays on. And you can see again where I just cut off those edges because I didn't want to deal with them anymore. So everything is cut and laid out, and we're going to be good to go here. So the next thing we want to do is we're actually going to use baby wipes. Now, I actually have a little bit of water in my tray. I'm going to put my red, I'm using Waverly chalk paint, and I'm putting a little bit of red. My baby wipes were a little on the dry side, but you don't want them too overly moist because if you get them too wet, it's going to leak underneath your transfer tape because it's more of a stain at this point. So you want to keep them as dry as you can. The other thing you want to do is, in this case, you want to go with the grain and with your transfer. So you want to go back and forth with it to try and do the stain method, because again, we're looking for more of a stain, and I wasn't going to go buy red stain when I can actually kind of do the same technique with a baby wipe. So just rub everything on there. Again, try and go with the grain and go with the lines of your transfer tape to make everything line up as much as you can. And then once that's done, just let it dry for a little bit before we move on to the next step. I also pulled my transfer tape off right away when I was done, just because I wanted to make sure if there was anything underneath the transfer tape, I had it. Now that I let it dry a little bit, now we're going to move on to the doing the blue area for the stars. And again, remember, we left the stars on there because I want to do the blue portion of it. So again, I peeled it away from my backing. I put my backing down on it, and I actually left it so I could see a little bit, because I wanted to see where the stripes are on the one side, and then I want to make sure I could see the bottom so I could line everything up. And when I cut this one, I actually left a little extra on the sides to give me, so that I didn't have to do any tape off or anything else, to make sure I had everything. Once I had everything lined up, just pushed everything down, did the hinge method, pulled off my backing, used my squeegee, and I laid everything else down the rest of the way and gave it a really good rub down. So make sure you get everything rubbed down really, really well. Now, mind you, because we did burnish this, they're not going to stick totally on it, because there's still some burn marks on it. So you want to make sure you burnish it really, really well. And even when you're pulling it up, you're going to have to be pushing it down a little bit. So it takes a little bit of work to do that portion of it. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit so that you can see the steps that I took to do that. And again, try and go away from the grain when pulling it off. I know it's a little harder. But if you're pulling too hard, too fast, you run the tendency to pull off some of that wood. But just take your time with it and pull it off, because this part did take a little bit longer. And I actually, like I said, I had to kind of go back through and push the stars down, squeegee them out, and everything else like that. And it took me a little bit to work this transfer tape off. Something else you could do on the transfer tape side to help so that it wasn't as sticky is take a piece and kind of like stick it to your clothes and then stick it down. Even though this was a medium tack, it was still fairly sticky, and so that was where some of the issue came from. And right about here is where you can see that I probably realized that, oh shoot, I was missing a star. So, but again, we worked with it, and so once this is done, we'll come back and we'll do the paint portion of it. Okay, now it's time to do the blue portion paint. Okay, kind of the same thing. Again, you need my wipes, because they're older, needed a little bit more, but I want to kind of give you some heads ups and some warnings. Again, watch your mask material. Okay, again, make sure you're going with the grain as much as you can. Take your time. And when I was on the wet edge, it was pull away, and then when I got to the stars, I kind of had to work out a little bit to the edges. So when I got to the stars, I had bleed, you guys, and I will be fully honest with that. I had some bleed on there, and what I should have done is went from the star and then went out from the middle of each star. Okay, and so you can see there I had a little bit of bleed, but I did need that star over in the other spot where I made the mistake. So again, you just slowly work your way. The blue takes a little bit longer than the red just because of all the stars. And again, I would take my baby wipe and my paint, and from the stars go outward just to kind of get an edge, and then just keep working around them. And so you can see it wasn't sticking very well because of that water on there. So just be careful on there. Take your time, and again, work from the star outward, and then fill in the sections between it. And it'll make things a whole lot easier when you're doing your round and everything else, and give you that look. Because of the antique look of the stain and the burning, the bleeds really didn't look that bad when I was done with it. And so I also went through at that point then and added some brown that I'll show you that I distressed at the, or that I actually added at the end. The other thing you could do, and I didn't try this, is sometimes you can get away maybe with Modge Podge, but I was a little concerned on the Modge Podge. One, you're going to want to make sure that you're using a non-glossy one, but I was also concerned if it would stain and give me a good look on that. So that would be an option to try. I just didn't try it. This was some of the things I learned as I went along in this process on it. The stripes turned out really good. It was more of the stars, and that's one thing that I would have did differently. You also could dab around the stars to help out as well, to help prevent some of the bleeding taking place. So the last step that I did before I applied the words to it is I actually took some brown chalk paint, again the baby wipe, and I did wet this down a little bit more because I didn't want a whole lot of it. I just wanted a really distressed look. And I went around the edges, and I ran around the edges of my stripes and the stars just to give it that little bit more of an antique burned look to it. And it really, I think, added to the piece when everything was said and done. So just something extra that I added to it. It's up to you if you'd like to do it. So then for this last portion of the project, we're going to add our saying on here. I decided to use Sweet Land of Liberty. And if you notice in the cut file, I included an offset for you built into it. I thought the pop of color really would add on to it, especially if you decide not to use the staining and the painting it around and you wanted the vinyl instead. I think the pop of color would actually helps with the separation of the colors. So I went through and added that extra step on. So go ahead, cut your vinyl out, and then weed everything that you need to weed. So we're just going to go ahead and weed out our vinyl. And then we're going to put our transfer tape on, and we'll speed up for that section. When I laid down this last piece of my transfer tape on mine, I found it was easier to attach it to my cutting mat and then just slide my vinyl underneath it and lay it down so that I didn't get any bubbles on it. It was just the size of it and made it a lot easier. So just kind of a little trick there is to kind of hinge it up. Now what I'm going to do with this so that I can line it up, because I didn't use any registration marks to cut it, I just grabbed a piece of parchment paper and I'm going to lay it down on top of my letters. And then I'm going to grab the offset. And I found it was easier to work away from me. So I lined everything up, got it the way I want it to go. Now remember, when working with the parchment paper technique, you have to leave in a little extra of your transfer tape showing so that you can actually attach it to the area you want to so it lays down. So I lift up, doing the hinge method, and I'm slowly laying everything down with my squeegee. And so once I have everything laid down with my squeegee, I can then pull my backing away from my transfer tape and letters. I do find it's easier, especially on these, to pull the backing away from your vinyl and your transfer tape versus pulling it the other way. It just makes it a lot easier. So now I'm going to take my round, I'm going to take my words, find my center, lay it so that it's centered, and then I use the land of and use that on the bottom portion of the stars and the stripes to line everything up. Squeegee everything out, pull your transfer tape, again going against the grain, and away you go.